Howdy. Today's story is entitled Daniel. It's not really a Daniel story, but it's a Daniel story, trust me. Okay, so before we get into the Daniel story, just a little bit of business. One, if you like this stuff, like it, share it, subscribe to it, and hit the notifications bell if you want to see more of it. Two is this stuff is user supported, which means that I'd be thrilled if you became a patron. So find the link down below in the description. Plus, there's a whole lot more content coming. The question I get asked a lot is, so Miles, how did you get into tango? Well, I will tell you. And that's what today's story is all about. How did I get into Argentine tango? Okay, so at the time I was living on the West Coast and doing a lot of software development. And Daniel was a client of mine. Daniel had been a client of mine for almost 10 years because I was hosting his website and doing software development for him. Daniel would frequently call me and ask me to come and fix something. Mind you, I'm on the West Coast. So I'd remotely hook up to his machine and fix his issues. This time he called me up with a long laundry list of things and said, you know, Miles, can you come and look at my machine? And I'm like, it's just it was just, I just needed to actually be in the physical presence of the machine to actually fix the problems. So I planned an East Coast trip, and I needed to go to the East Coast anyways to see a couple of clients and to drum up some more business. So what did I do? I got on a plane, rented a car, and drove up the Eastern Seaboard from from North Carolina to Boston, and then from Boston to Northampton, where Daniel was. So I get to Daniel's place and I solve his problems in under 2 minutes. It was just Daniel misunderstanding and him misunderstanding how to describe his problem, and me misunderstanding what he asked for. So there you go. So after I solved this problem, then he says to me, well, Miles, you know, I need to go up to the studio. Why don't you come with? Because I got a project I want to talk to you about. I said, okay. So we walk and talk, and Daniel says to me, so I'm thinking about digitizing my entire video library. Now, I need to stop right here and explain something. Daniel, at the time, and still is the reason why Argentine Tango, not that Dancing with the Stars shit, the reason why Argentine Tango, social dancing, exists here in the United States. If it weren't for Daniel, then it probably never would have happened, not in the way that it has. What Daniel did very early on was, when he was learning tango, and had been learning for almost 2 years, his teacher at the time was Deity Rasconi, who he brought out of retirement to teach him how to dance, because everybody said, go learn with Deity, even though Deity was retired at that point. So Daniel started videoing their lessons, and then as time went on, he started videoing other lessons, and then got their permission to sell those lessons, and basically started a video instruction mail order business. And he was doing a bang up business at that point in time. And then he sold it, which caused more consternation than you basically ever want to deal with. So then he sold it, and then he retired. But he had this entire backlog of about 600 videos, each about an hour in length, plus of about 20 or 30 different instructors that he had agreements with, that were all professionally shot, then edited, and then put into a cohesive instructional environment. And this was his project. And I said to him, okay, we can do that. And I'm thinking to myself, I know this project is going to be like $70,000 or $80,000. Just the digitizing of those videotapes is going to cost you anywhere between 20 and 30, and that was like 20 years ago. I knew that going in, but the real bulk of this was the software involved, because the software didn't exist to allow for the sale of that video in digital compressed form. At that point in time, there were no mechanisms to sell this stuff. It had to be created, and that's what I was doing. So I had to build that software, and I knew that that was like, you know, anywhere between $40,000 and $60,000 worth of development time. Not an easy thing to do, especially not in 2006. All right, so he starts describing the project to me, and I'm as he's describing the project, I'm thinking, yeah, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Every time he describes something is another $5,000 or $10,000. So by the time he's finished yapping, that fee is up to about $70,000 or $80,000. And then he says to me, in no uncertain terms, Miles, complete juxtaposition, have you ever taken a class with me? And I sheepishly said, no, I haven't. And Daniel says to me, well, you are now. I need to stop right here. Usually when I'm working with a client, or at that point when I was usually working with a client, I put myself in the position of being a client of theirs, because in order to solve their problems, I needed to be one of their clients so that I could alleviate those problems and then actually do the thing that I was hired to do. So that, you know, whatever marketing plan I came up with, or whatever program I came up with actually worked and they actually used. So I didn't do that with Daniel. He'd been hosting with me for web hosting with me for almost 10 years at that point, and I had not taken a single class with him because I didn't need to get inside his business. But at the same time, in my own defense, I was a little scared. The idea of learning Argentine Tango was not on my list of things to do. I gotta be honest with you. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I went to all three of his classes that night. His beginner class, his intermediate class, and his advanced class. So the beginner class, I lasted about 30 minutes and then had to sit down because it just got too complicated and I was too far behind from the beginner idea. Then in the intermediate class, I lasted about 4 minutes and 58 seconds. And the only reason that I lasted that long is because Daniel stopped talking at 4 minutes and 59 seconds. Then I sat down and watched the rest of the class. And then I stuck around for the intermediate class. Now, I had no intention of, stuck around for the advanced class. And I had no intention of participating, but Daniel made me start to participate in the advanced class. And I'm like, I know nothing. He starts talking, he starts yapping for about a half a minute or so, and then he stops, and when he stops, I sit down. Because there was no way in hell I was gonna be able to accomplish X, Y, and Z. He was showing some mood that was just like, whatever. But I did sit and watch. I watched a lot. So, Daniel was an amazing teacher, is an amazing teacher. He's very detailed, but he's also incredibly accessible. He makes the material seemingly very easy for you to do. This is a trait that I found in very few teachers. This is no slight against any teacher that I've ever worked with, or even myself. But Daniel seemingly makes a very complex piece of vocabulary incredibly simple. And this is a hallmark of a really good teacher. There are very few of them that can actually do that don't go down the rabbit hole of, this and that and it. Daniel just makes it easy for you to think that you can do that. Now, mind you, 9 times out of 10 you can't, but that's the hallmark of a good teacher. So I'm watching the advanced class, and I'm thinking all this stuff to myself, and I'm thinking, there's no way in hell I'm gonna be able to do this. And the class ends, and then there's a practica. Now, I should point out to you that Daniel does something unusual. The way in which I just described those 3 classes, I describe them in the way that I would usually do them. Daniel did something very unusual, and I started to do this later on as I was teaching. He taught the advanced class first, the intermediate class second, and the beginner class third. And you're gonna say to yourself, why do that? Because what he did was he asked the advanced people to stick around with the intermediate people. And then, you know, those people that were in the advanced and the intermediate class just stick around for the beginner class so that they could help out with the beginner class. Brilliance! Absolute brilliance. And the reason why it's absolutely brilliant is because you're literally reinforcing all the stuff that you want them to know, that they've seemingly forgotten. So I stick around for the practica, and I'm watching basically a full room. Usually when you're teaching tango in nightly classes at a practica, there's like five or six people that show up for the practica and you're done. This way, using the advanced to beginner class sequence and then having them stick around for the practica, you get a full room. So I stick around for the practica and I'm watching, you know, basically 40 or 50 people all teaching one another. It's insane. I'm like, this is cool. At the time, I didn't realize just how important that was. I realized just how important it is now after teaching for the better portion of 15 years. Practica ends, and Daniel decides that we're gonna go out to dinner, and 15 or 16 of his students decide to join us downstairs. So we get this big long table in the back, and 2 seconds in, they're all talking about tango. And I'm just like, and Daniel is sitting at the head of the table and I'm sitting next to him. And he says in a very loud, booming voice, "So, Miles, what'd you think?" Now, more of the story. And I said, "Of what?" He said, "Of the classes." Now, I need to stop here. I know, another one of these things. And tell you that Daniel and I, over the 10 years that I've been working with him, had developed a rapport. And that rapport was honesty. If he asked me a question, I gave him the honest answer. I didn't bullshit him, and there was no reason to do that. I never padded my estimates with him because it served me no purpose. So, in that vein, I answered his question in the way that using that as my hallmark, as the basis of how we talk to one another, of just answer it directly. And he's come to expect this from me. When he asks a question, I give that to him. And this is something he had remarked on very early on in our relationship. When other software developers would bullshit him, I didn't bullshit him. And I told him the unvarnished truth. So he asked this question, "So, Miles, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, of what?" And he said, "Of classes tonight." And the table stops. And I said to him in no uncertain terms, without missing a beat, "I hated it." And they all looked at me like I had 16 heads, like I had just shat in a holy place. And Daniel, without missing a beat, without missing a hint, he says to me, "I'm gonna tell you why you hated it." I said, "Oh yeah, that's rich, Daniel. Tell me why I hate something." And he said, "The reason why you hated it is because it made you feel small and insignificant." You're gonna say to yourself, "That was mean." No, it was honest. And you know what? The fucker was right. He was absolutely 100% correct. It did make me feel small and insignificant. So, I'm standing there with my gut hanging out, and Daniel tells me in no uncertain terms right after that, he just like launches into it. He says, "Listen, Miles, I've got a huge project that needs to get done. You're the guy that can do it. Let me teach you a little bit of tango so that you can understand what it is that you're trying to do." And I said to him, "Okay, great. So we reach an agreement, and the agreement is that I will come back for 2 weeks, and then he's going to teach me tango for 2 hours a day for over 2 weeks, and that will sort of give me an idea what it is that I'm trying to do. In return for, you know, him doing that for me, I'm supposed to essentially give him a discount because he's giving his time to train me, so I should give him a discount on his on the services. So we reach an agreement, and I come back 2 weeks later. I close up shop in San Francisco, but I'm only going to be gone for 2 weeks. I start with him 2 hours a day, every single day, and it's hard. I'm an idiot. I thought I understood how to do X, Y, and Z. I don't. I've been a dancer most of my life, and I know dick. And Daniel is a very patient teacher. Every once in a while he loses his temper and says, Jesus Christ, how can you be this stupid? But he's right. You know, I was just not thinking. I was just like, hand me the answer. I don't want to think about it. But in tango, you absolutely have to think about it. It's not like, you know, steps, patterns, and figures, or at least not the way that Daniel teaches. Other people, you know, I would have been very successful in their program because I just wanted the information. Daniel forced me to actually start to think about what it was I was doing and how I was actually doing it. And that was like, what the is that all about? If I only knew. Those 2 hours a day became 6. And those 2 weeks, that became 3 months. I had to give up my apartment in New York, in San Francisco, and basically kiss goodbye to my life. And at that point, you know, I was right before I left for San Francisco, it was tango what? And as I'm talking to my friends online and on the phone, it's tango every third word out of my mouth. If I had any friends left by the time I left, you know, Daniel's care and feeding, they were either starting class or I didn't speak to them that often anymore because my head was so turned by tango. So those 3 months, I was basically sitting at his feet every single day. Every single day. I sat through most of his classes, most of his private lessons that I could. I became one of his intensive level students and lapped it up. I forgot anything about actual software development at this point because my head was just so deviated by tango. So you're gonna say to yourself, wow, that sounds wonky. Yeah, that's not the wonky part. What happened next is the real wonky part. So before we get to that, just a tiny little shout out. If you'd like to sponsor the channel, trust me, I need one. And 2, become a patron. I absolutely need the cash, wholeheartedly. So follow the links down below. All right, and now, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. About 3 weeks in, Daniel had taught me a piece of vocabulary. And today it has a name. Then it did not. It did not have a name. It was only the vocabulary. And Daniel taught me the vocabulary because he didn't want me to look like a dance studio baby. Now I'll show you the piece of vocabulary, and its name today is the golden nugget of tango, and it really is the golden nugget of tango because it contains everything that you'll need to know to go out social dancing. So we work on this thing for 3 weeks. We work on this thing every single day, and I think I've got it. I think I've got it. So I go to my very first milonga. It's more of a practica than a milonga, but it's a milonga. And I get on the dance floor and I start doing the pattern that he taught me. And the pattern is actually supposed to go down the line of dance. I line up with my partner and I start dancing, you know, not just against the line of dance, but across lanes of dance. This is a major no-no. And obviously I run into a whole bunch of people. And I'm so disheartened at this point. I just, you know, go back to my car and just like start crying. And The next day I walk into Daniel's class, and I'm just in tears, and he says to me, "What happened?" I said, "You lied to me. I tried to do the pattern thing and it didn't work." He said to me, "Show me what you did." I said, "Okay." So I showed it to him. He said, "Okay. How'd you line up?" He knew exactly what the problem was. I told him, you know, which way the line of dance was, and he went, "Okay, so how did you line up?" I said, "The way you taught me." And he said, "Okay, so which way did you go?" I went, because I lined up this way, I went that way. He went, "Lesson learned." I basically sat at Daniel's feet for 3 months after that. Another 2.5 months after that. I learned everything that I could possibly learn from him. Not really, because, you know, he essentially kicked me out. And the reason he kicked me out is because he said, "You need to go out social dancing a lot and put to use what I've taught you, and you'll come back later and we'll work on it." I said, "Okay." So I got on the next available flight, landed in San Francisco, and I don't have an apartment anymore. I have no place to live. I made a beeline for the Enterprise rental car booth, rented a car, and you know where I went? I didn't go get a hotel. Thought never crossed my mind. You know where I went? And now, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. I went to the nightly milonga, which at that point in time was the San Francisco Harbor milonga, which is no more. And I knew a friend that danced, you know, tango in San Francisco. I met her, danced with her. It was awful. And then, you know where I slept that night? In the car. And then the next morning I set about, what am I gonna do? So I set myself on a path of personal self-discovery. I was going to learn this dance. I was going to learn how to Argentine Tango. So I got in touch with a whole long laundry list of teachers and started taking private lessons with them. 2 hours a day, an hour as a lead, and an hour as a follow. Because Daniel taught me to lead and follow at the same time. Every piece of vocabulary that he taught me, everything that he taught me to do, he taught me to do lead and follow. Not just lead, but also follow it. To understand it. This is also unique in the tango world. Not very few teachers teach this, but more are teaching this way, that you want to understand both roles. A lot of people get really persnickety about this. And the reason they get really persnickety about it has everything to do with gender roles. Oh, I can't. No, that's a woman's role. I can't do that. Or that's a guy's role. That's a man's role. I can't do that. And that's absolute bullshit. You have a human body. You have 2 legs, 2 arms. Of course you can do it. But very few teachers actually teach this methodology. They want you to genderize the dance. And Daniel did not want me to do that. He wanted me to understand, to dissect and to take apart the roles, and to be able to switch independently of that, so that I could understand inherently what was going on. This is the brilliance of Daniel Trenner. I start taking classes as a lead and a follow. Some of those teachers refuse to work with me as a follow. "You're a guy, you can't do that." I'm like, yes I can. I do it quite well. And as it turns out, some of them just would not work with me at all. But some of them did, and those became my 9 teachers. Out of 37 teachers that were teaching at that point in time in San Francisco, I contracted with 9 of them. The others would not work with me, either as a lead or a follow. They'd take me on as a lead, but they wouldn't take me on as a follow. I'm like, what the is up with that? And as it turns out, there were a lot of men in classes that would not dance with me as a follower. Talk about, like, what? This is San Francisco. You people are like, you know, open-minded. Not that open-minded. So I started going to nightly classes, and then I started practicing afterwards. Going to nightly classes, then going to the milongas afterwards, then going to private lessons the next day, and then practicing for about 2 or 3 hours by myself, and then a small break. And then I started finding other practice partners to work with, so I'd usually get about 2 or 3 a day, work with them, and then start the whole process all over again. So my day pretty much looked like wake up, blog for about 2 hours from the night before, clean up the notes that I made from the night before, go to my private lesson, which was usually at about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, do 2 hours, one is a lead, an hour is a lead, an hour is a follow, then 3 hours, lunch, then 3 hours of private work, solo practice work, a small hour break, and then practice sessions with 3 individuals, and then a dinner break, and then class, beginner, intermediate, and advanced class. Then some milonga somewhere, and then go find a parking spot and jot down my notes for the night, and then go to sleep. So you're gonna ask me, or at least you should be asking at this point, so Miles, did you ever get a place to live? And the answer to that question is no, I didn't. What I ended up doing was renting a car on a monthly basis and living out of my car. And I did that for 2 years. So while I was learning, I was sleeping out of my car. I was living out of the car. I would go park at one of the only spots outside of San Francisco, just across the Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, the outlook point right there, and park every single night, because it's the only spot where you can do that, where none of the 5 police agencies will give you any flack, because it's an overnight parking spot. Yay, free parking. And then I'd wash up at Starbucks in the morning, and once a week I would rent a bed at a hotel, at a very cheap Motel 6, and take a shower. And if I was going to a milonga, a really fancy milonga that week, then I probably rent a hotel very close to the milonga, and then take a shower. On the weekends, I would study with whatever visiting instructor was there, and coming through town that everybody recommended. And there were a lot of visiting instructors at that point, and I take up all their private time if I could. How on earth did I afford 7 private lessons a week, 2 hours a day? That shit gets expensive. I spent almost $1,400 a week just on private lessons alone. At the time, I was a software developer and had been for almost 20 years. So I took all of my money from my client work, basically, which was not a small amount of money, but it basically allowed me the luxury of taking private lessons every single day for 2.5 years. That shit adds up. Trust me, boy, does it ever add up. And I went into debt because of it. So yeah, there was that. So basically, I took all of my money from my software development and piled that directly into private lessons. That's how I was able to afford it. There you go. So you're gonna ask me, why didn't you just get an apartment? Because it was actually cheaper, and it's still cheaper, to rent a car and live out of the car than it is to rent an apartment in San Francisco. And the reason is because the rental rates at that point were like, $3,700 a month. The car rental was $800. You do the math. So I saved a whole bunch of money and put that money directly into private lessons. And every 5 or 6 months, I'd go back to Daniel and he'd correct what was wrong. At the time, most people saw what I was doing as obsessive. And most of my friends at that point, that was the only word that they could figure out that matched sort of their understanding of what I was doing. It was just very obsessive, because every third word out of my mouth was tango, 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 tango. It was tango this, tango that. So I was obsessive as far as they were concerned. It wasn't obsession. It was immersion. So tango is a lot like a language. And in order to speak that language, you have to immerse yourself in that language 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So tango, tango, tango means immersion, not obsession. Which brings me to a rather another important component, which was, at the time, I was blogging what I was doing every single day. And this wasn't, you know, like, gosh, I danced with so-and-so last night. It was absolutely amazing, so fabulous, and I'm so joyous. It had nothing to do with that. It was, I needed to get what was in my head about what I was learning and how I was learning it out of my head so that I could get more stuff into my head. Does that make sense? So most people saw that as egotistical at the time because I was blogging about my prowess on the dance floor. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with getting what was in my head out of my head so that I could put more stuff into my head. It wasn't egotistical. It was about cleaning out the deciduous material of what was going on so that I could put more stuff in it, put more stuff in my head. That's it. That's all I was trying to do. That is how I got into Argentine Tango. Basically, I back-ended into it. I didn't consciously go into it thinking that I want to dance. Now, as a matter of fact, that was the last thing on my mind. So if you're thinking about getting into Argentine Tango, here's some salient advice for you. Don't. If I knew then what I know now, I would say this to a prospective person that is thinking about getting into Argentine Tango. Get thee into a beginner class and stay there. Go through it a couple of times. Go through that same beginner class at least 3 or 4 times because you're gonna need it. This is not for the faint of heart. If you don't have the will, if you don't have the desire to study, if you don't have the desire to really invest yourself in the process, then don't bother. Really, don't. I can say this now after 15 years of teaching because I couldn't say it then. I'm saying it now. And the reason I couldn't say it then is because I was teaching and nobody wants to hear the absolute God's honest truth with this stuff. They really don't. You don't want to hear this. It's like you're thinking that, you know, it should be easy, and it's not. Tango requires study. It requires due diligence. It requires you to show up emotionally, physically, and intellectually. And if you're not able to do that, don't bother. I know I should say, wow, it's fabulous and it's amazing. Yeah, it's fabulous and amazing after you've been studying for about 8 years. And then you actually start to dance. Only at that point. Up until that point, then it's a lot of trial and error and fuck-uppery. And worse than that, it's a lot of ego. A lot of ego. Somebody else's ego. Your ego. Like, oh, my teacher never taught me that, and that's not true, and not so much with that. So once you get past all of that happy bullshit, then, and only then, can you start to actually understand the dancing part. And that's just one part of what you absolutely have to know. You have to know about the music. You have to know about the history. And you're going to say to yourself, music, it's just to follow the beat. No, it isn't. Because Argentine Tango music is not like any other music you've ever heard in your life. There's so much subtlety to it, it's not even funny. It takes a lifetime. And I'm not kidding, I'm not over-exaggerating when I say that. It takes a lifetime to understand that nuance and how to dance to it. It's hard. And most people don't want to do that kind of work at all, in any way, shape, or form. It requires, again, thought. I know. The realm of the hard to believe. Now, if I sound somewhat cynical, it's because I've done all this work on my own. I've done that hard work. And I know what is absolutely required of someone in order to dance Argentine Tango in any meaningful way. All right, so let's wrap this up, because it's getting a little long in the tooth. If I had to do it all over again, would I? I met some really cool people in tango. and I met some not so cool people. If I had to do it all over again, I liked the process of learning it. I didn't like the politics. And there's a lot of politics in dancing, a lot of politics in Argentine Tango, more so than you can ever imagine. Would I do it again? Maybe. Maybe. It depends on who I meet, who I would meet. If it weren't for tango, I never would have met Yenny. If it weren't for tango, I certainly wouldn't be here talking to you. And if it weren't for tango, my life would be very different. All right, that is enough yapping for today. I hope you enjoyed the story of how I got into tango. I will discuss how I got out of tango at a later point in time. If you're interested in that, please comment down below. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to hit the notifications bell. There's a whole lot more projects coming, a whole lot more videos like this coming. So please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And oh yeah, by the way, this project is not going to fund itself. So if you could, like, $3, $5, $7, whatever you can afford, hit that Patreon link and become a subscriber and help a brother out. There you go. Have yourselves a fine and amazing day, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere on the road. Bye.